All right, so let's begin by going over our announcements. So the last day to drop a class this semester is April 14th. You will want to get in touch with the registrar to go through with that. I'm not exactly sure what their policy is for this semester because normally you need my signature, and obviously that's not going to happen, but I'm sure they have something in place. So if you are in a position to drop either my class or one of your other classes, April 14th is going to be your last day to do that, to drop with a W. Let me clarify that. Your last day to drop with a withdrawal. If you don't drop by April 14th, then you have to accept a grade. You have to see the class through. You have to accept a grade. So if you have a dire F in one of your classes, it might be smart to do the withdrawal, but then again, everybody's situation is different. So I always recommend talking to an advisor before you make any decisions like that. So your final exam for this class is going to be April 16th. Now that is coming up. It kind of snuck up on me as well. All of this coronavirus stuff has just kind of made me lose track of the day a little bit, but that is coming up. So I'm going to have a study guide up for you guys on D2L by the end of this week. My plan is to have that up by Thursday. The format of that exam, I am going to have to change things just a little bit since you are now taking this test online. I haven't exactly come up with what this exam is going to look like. I have a pretty good idea in my head. I think that it's going to be primarily short response questions about overarching themes in photography that we have covered up until this point. But I will have a study guide up on Thursday so you will know for sure. That's going to be open on D12 on the 16th. I'm going to open it at 10 a.m. and then you'll have till 11 p.m. to take that exam, and it's going to be 50 minutes. If you have a blue card, I will happily accommodate that. Just please get in touch so I can change your specific time for the exam. Or sorry, not your time, but how much time you will have to complete the exam. So your final project is due April 23rd at midnight. On box.com, I'm going to have a folder open for that as well. Please put all of your images into a folder that is labeled as your name, and then we can just go in and click through your individual folder. I'm still considering a couple of different routes for the final exam critique. I want to do something that's a little bit more personal than what we've done up until this point. So if any of you guys are in another class that has a critique-based portion and your professors are doing something that you think is working really well, I would love to hear about it. Or if you just have any ideas or something that you would like to see happen, I'm all ears. So just send me an email and I'd love to talk about that. Okay, so today we're going to be discussing concept and form in specifically photographs, but this is applicable to many different styles of art and can really be seen throughout art. So we're just going to begin by simply defining concept and then discussing whether or not your photographs are conceptual. So concept is very simply just an idea or thought. It's the idea behind your work, whatever you would like your images to communicate to your viewer. So every artwork has concepts. So yes, your photos are conceptual. Whether or not you were consciously assigning them meaning or assigning them concept, they still have concept. And that is simply because when people look at your work, depending on what they're seeing, what the subject matter is, the mood of the image, people are going to assign meaning to that. And then they will come away with their own concept or their own meaning, whether or not you consciously assigned it or not. So we're going to quickly define these three different terms in art. I use them a lot in class, and so I'm just going to give you a simple definition and kind of example of what exactly I am talking about. So subject matter is what your photograph is of, form is what the photo looks like, and concept is what the photo is about. So for example, if you were to take an image, say it's a landscape image, and there's a herd of elk in it, and there's really beautiful clouds and trees surrounding them. That is what your subject matter is. So the elk, the trees, the mountains, the clouds, all of that is the subject matter. It's what your photograph is literally of. The form of the image is a little bit different. So form can cover all sorts of different things. To begin, is the image black and white or is it in color? That's a formal choice. Is the image a square crop or is it an 8x10 crop? That's a formal choice. What is the lighting like? Is the lighting really dramatic or is it really bright? Those are formal qualities that you have made or have come about in your image for whatever reason. So the form is what your image looks like. The concept is what the photograph is about. So maybe you're making an image or making a project that is discussing the herd mentality or herd tendencies of animals like elk. And so you set out to find images of herd animals, and maybe that's the concept of the work. Or maybe it's not. Maybe the concept is about a sense of place, and you want to document Montana as a sense of place. And so you set out to take wildlife images because that's central to kind of our life living in Montana. So that could be the concept of the image as well. Concept is, again, just the overarching idea that you would like your photographs to convey. Now, something to keep in mind is that your concept won't always be interpreted by the viewer the way that you want, and that's okay. The main reason, like I briefly touched on, is because people are going to assign meaning to your images whether or not you wanted it to mean one thing or another. And this happens a lot when, say you post an image on Instagram, or you have an image up in a gallery, or you turn in an image for school, or whatever the case may be. There's often times where you are not standing directly next to your image ready to justify your choices to anybody that might look at it. In fact, that almost never happens. So then the result is that people are going to look at your work and assign their own meaning to the images. And that's okay. Sometimes that can even be a really positive thing. I have had this experience a lot, and I know you guys probably have as well, but you take an image and you think that it is communicating one idea, and then somebody looks at it and they come away with something completely different that you did not intend, but sometimes you end up liking that better than your original idea. So sometimes it can be a positive that people don't always interpret your work the way that you would like, but either way, it's just important to remember that you can't always control the interpretation of your work, and that's okay. So concept always influences form, and form always influences concept. So what I mean by that is that if your images are meant to be about, the vastness of Montana landscapes, and you really want to communicate that idea of, big sky country. Now, what you might want those images to look like is, big and showing those huge skies, and maybe you print them on bigger paper than you would originally. But all of those formal choices are going to influence your concept. And additionally, form is always going to influence concept. So those things are kind of interconnected. And we're going to look at three projects by various artists and discuss how they tackle form and concept and how they relate to one another. So the first project we're going to look at is entitled Contraband, and it's by an artist named Taryn Simon, and she finished this in 2010. So I'm going to read you a brief artist statement. Contraband comprises 1,075 photographs taken at both the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Federal Inspection Site and the U.S. Postal Service International Mail Facility at John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York. For one working week, Taryn Simon remained on site at JFK and continuously photographed items detained or seized from passengers and express mail entering the United States from abroad. So we're going to click through these images, and I want you to consider what are the formal qualities of this image, what is the subject matter, and what is the concept. So we just found out a little bit about the project, and so we have an idea of the concept. We know that these are items that were detained coming into the United States, so they're all counterfeit goods of some kind or another, or just something that was illegal to bring into the United States. Now the formal qualities, many of the images look just like this one here. So we're seeing a square format. We're seeing a really simple white neutral background. We're seeing the subject matter centered in the middle. And we're seeing the work, or the subject matter, relatively untouched by the artist. So she has sometimes taken it out of its packaging or has included its packaging next to it, but for the most part, it's pretty untouched. So those are all formal choices she's making, and the subject matter varies from image to image. Here we're looking at a bird of some form, so that's the subject matter for this specific image. So I've included this image just to show you kind of the vastness and the scale of all of these items that she set out to document, and this is why she came away with so many photos, over 1,000 images from just 1 week in these facilities. So what we're looking at here is counterfeit Louis Vuitton bags, and again we're just seeing that those similar formal choices, like I mentioned, the square, the white background, the centeredness of the subject matter. All of those things make this work really consistent from image to image. And it allows us to just focus on kind of the obscurity or the weirdness even of these items that she has found or chosen to highlight. Here we're looking at horse sausage of Eastern European origin. So obviously some things are pretty gross, but they all, for some reason, people had that desire to bring them, in either home with them or into the United States for whatever reason. So what this work does is it actually gives us a kind of interesting look at human desire, specifically, not even specifically American, because these things come from all over the world. So it's kind of this universal idea of what is desirable, whether it's a brand name or a certain luxury item, like that Louis Vuitton bag we looked at, or whatever. Maybe it's fruits and vegetables or something obscure and so bizarre like that bird. Why would somebody want to bring that? I don't know, but obviously they did. So what we're looking at here is the installation view of this show. So what you'll notice right away is that she has organized all of these images into categories. So we've got these little kind of subsections throughout the gallery, and she's organized all of these images into like items. So we've got, we saw that horse sausage. So one is like all meat products, and one is all jewelry and like counterfeit checks, and then like designer handbags. So she's further organized them into these little subcategories, and then she's put the images on the wall in this like grid, or almost looks like a bar graph of some form. So all of those choices cement this work as something that is supposed to highlight not only the vastness, the large number of these items, but put them down into these little categories in almost a scientific way. So when I look at this work, it reminds me of like a scientist documenting things that they might have found out in the world or whatever it might be, samples of something, but she's taken this very scientific approach to showing off these items. So those are her formal choices that are highlighting the subject matter and reinforcing her concept about the vastness of these items, and just kind of how bizarre they are. And she highlights how bizarre they are by putting them into these little categories. Okay, so we're just going to look through a few more. This is counterfeit checks. And the white frame, all of those choices are formal choices. So the rectangular white frame, the slightly warmer cream color of the backdrop against the really cool white of the gallery wall, these are all formal choices. Okay, so the next project we're going to look at is by the same artist, but it's completely different concept, it's completely different subject matter, and the form is completely different. So we're going to compare and contrast these two projects in terms of their formal qualities. So this is called The Innocents, and she finished this in 2002. So The Innocents 2002 documents the stories of individuals who served time in prison for violent crimes they did not commit. At issue is the question of photography's function as a credible eyewitness and arbiter of justice. The primary cause of wrongful conviction is mistaken identification. A victim or eyewitness identifies a suspected perpetrator through law enforcement's use of photographs and lineups. This procedure relies on the assumption of precise visual memory. But through exposure to composite sketches, mugshots, Polaroids, and lineups, eyewitness memory can change. In the history of these cases, photographs offered the criminal justice system a tool that transformed innocent citizens into criminals. Photographs assisted officers in obtaining eyewitness identifications and aided prosecutors in securing convictions. Simon photographed these men at sites that had particular significance to their illegitimate conviction: the scene of misidentification, the scene of arrest, the scene of the crime, or the scene of the alibi. All of these locations hold contradictory meanings for the subjects. The scene of arrest marks the starting point of a reality based in fiction. The scene of the crime is at once arbitrary and crucial. This place, to which they have never been, changed their lives forever. In these photographs, Simon confronts photography's ability to blur truth and fiction, an ambiguity that can have severe, even lethal consequences. So what I think is if I could boil this all down into one sentence to highlight the concept of this work, it would be here. In these photographs, Simon confronts photography's ability to blur truth and fiction. So it's that idea of how photography influences things much beyond our control or beyond what we would even begin to understand. So looking at this work, we can right away tell how different this is from the images we just saw in Contraband. So we have an idea of the concept. The subject matter is portraits of these men and women who have been wrongfully convicted at a scene of significance. So that's the subject matter. Now, the formal qualities in this work are much different than that of Contraband. In Contraband, we wanted to see something that was kind of a scientific layout. It was very geometric and grid-like and just very precise and organized. Now, what we're seeing here appeals more to an emotional quality. So this work it's really a matter of life and death, and it's important that she allows the viewer to understand the weight of this work and what she is trying to document here. So what we're seeing is it changes throughout, but it is often this very powerful portrait, and the posing is something that I want you guys to focus on here. So in almost all of the images, I think actually in all of the images, we're getting this very strong eye contact from the person in the image, the subject matter, to the viewer. Now, what that does is it really allows us to sympathize with this person and to understand that this is, this could be anybody, this could be us. These are people that are victims of misidentification and wrongful conviction. So it really could be anyone. And having that powerful eye contact, I think, allows the viewer to understand the weight of this work and to understand just that the severity and the importance of what she's trying to document. So at the bottom of all of these images, you'll notice that she also includes information about the person. So the name, the scene of the arrest, a little bit about the location, a little bit about the crime, and then how much of their sentence they have served for whatever charges they're convicted for. And that's a formal quality as well. Intentionally including text with your images is one way to really cement or to help guide your viewers into that interpretation or to that meaning that you would like them to eventually come to. So I think it just further communicates that idea of humanity, and putting a name to this person just allows us to sympathize with them that much more. So the formal qualities of this work, obviously she's approached this completely differently because of the concept and the nature of the project. So that's why form always influences concept, and concept always influences form, because they will have an effect on your viewer one way or another. So you want to make sure that your form and your concept are communicating the same idea to your viewer. So just to briefly answer this question again, how did Simon approach form differently in these two projects? So in Contraband, she gave us something very scientific, very organized, very consistent throughout, because that work was not relying, it wasn't based around the human condition. It wasn't based around these emotional qualities. The purpose of that work was to just document all of these bizarre items that people felt inclined to bring into the country. Now, in The Innocents, we are dealing with this very emotional, very powerful concept. And so it's important that the form reiterates that to the viewer. So that's why we're getting that eye contact. We're getting a little bit of information about the subject matter or about that person. And we're seeing them at a significant location so that we as the viewer can put ourselves into their shoes a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to watch an artist talk by Terrence Simon. I've had this loading for a while, so hopefully this works. Maybe. Maybe not. Dang, guys. Okay, I'm going to let this load for a little bit and then try.
It's human nature to look for purpose or an answer in everything. And I think it's uncomfortable to accept purposelessness. I think I'm constantly trying to find some sort of truth or reality, and it does make you question this thing that we all kind of rest upon. which is this
Sorry, guys. It likes it better
searching
when it is
for
not full screen, so we're gonna try this.
a reason.
Come on. Wi-Fi problems, am I right, guys?
I guess I'm always functioning in almost a schizophrenic form, where I'm thinking about the content, but I'm simultaneously thinking about making a very seductive and effective image. And I often fail, but the image can teeter into this realm of abstraction, and then the text grabs the dream and brings you back into some sort of fixed definition that I'm constructing. The Innocence documents cases of wrongful conviction throughout the United States and photography's use in the criminal justice system. An image is presented to a victim of a crime, and it replaces the memory of the actual perpetrator.
Ah!
If there ever was one. And this whole idea about how photography could lead to someone's death on death row seemed to me this kind of perfect microcosm to look at the danger. An American Index was in response to September 11th in many ways. The government and American media were so interested in finding secret sites beyond our borders, and during that time I wanted to look inward at what was hidden and outside of popular consciousness within American borders. In Contraband, before I started, I was imagining what I would end up documenting: heroin and guns and all sorts of very evident threats. And in the end, what it ended up being was a massive pile of counterfeit goods. And it was everybody chasing the same dream, this universal desire for the same brand, the same luxury item. And you just got this sense of a kind of flattening of desire. The works in A Living Man Declared Dead and other chapters are comprised of 3 segments. The portrait panel is where I systematically order the members of a given bloodline. The text panel is where I present almost census-like information about all the individuals I photographed. And then in what I call the footnote panel, there are these more kind of abstract images and fragments of the stories. And the imagination in all of that was the way in which blood is so ordered and determined that perhaps the chaos that surrounds us and all the violent stories of survival in the world, perhaps that itself is patterned as well. I think because of the subject matter that I'm documenting, there is this want to see expressions of pain or anguish, or to see some sort of deeper, warmer, more intimate, perhaps sympathetic view. And I purposefully steer clear of all of that to create this very uncomfortable engagement for the audience with that which they're looking at. And it also creates a certain understanding of a distance between the photographer and the subject, where it's clearly stating I'm coming from a position of not knowing what that situation is like, and the audience as well. The more time I spend as a photographer, the less interested I am in the medium. So there's definitely this evolution through the projects in which I'm kind of shedding aesthetic embellishment, whether it be through lighting or color or these narrative scenarios, and it just seems to get more and more bare. It's still using photography, but in this very different form. And I think the way in which my generation works is very interdisciplinary. People are working in all different mediums and in all different directions and new forms as well. And at best, I would hope that it bridges a lot of these things and enters into a different territory.
Okay. So we're just going to look at one last project here that approaches concept and form and subject matter in a unique way. So this is called The Brown Cisterns. It's by a photographer named Nicholas Nixon, and he started this project in 1975, and it's ongoing. So in August 1974, Nick Nixon made a photograph of his wife Bibi and her 3 sisters. He wasn't pleased with the result and discarded the negative. In July 1975, he made one that seemed promising enough to keep. At the time, the Brown sisters were 15, 21, 23, and 25. The following June, Lori Brown graduated from college, and Nick made another picture of the 4 sisters. It was after this second successful picture that the group agreed to gather annually for a portrait and settled on this series' 2 constants. The sisters would always appear in the same order from left to right: Heather, Mimi, Bibi, and Lori, and they would jointly agree on a single image to represent a given year. Also significant and unchanging is the fact that each portrait is made with an 8x10 view camera on a tripod and is captured on black and white negative film. So I'm just going to click through these. For subject matter, we've got the 4 sisters. For form, there's several things that are remaining constant, like he mentioned, the camera he uses, so it's always an 8x10 view camera. They're always in black and white. They always appear in the same order, so that would be a formal quality. And then I guess another formal quality would be the selection of the image by the sisters, or maybe that falls under concept, who could say. So we'll click through these, and you can see how some things change in the image, but the constants obviously remain the same. So this is an interesting approach to the idea or the concept of time and how time changes what we're looking at. So you could carry out a project like this on a smaller scale by documenting a photo of yourself every day, you know, in your isolation or in your quarantine for however many days that it goes on. And that could be a really interesting idea where the concept is dealing with social isolation, the subject matter is you, and the formal qualities are, you know, the camera you're using, the posing you're in, the environment you're in, the lighting, all of those things that could or could not change day to day depending on what you would like to achieve. So I just think time is a really interesting idea to explore, which is why I chose to view this work. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about planning your final project and what exactly I am looking for in your final project, and some advice on how to choose an idea for your final project. So decide on a concept before you start photographing. Your concept does not have to be extremely complex to be successful. In fact, you'll be doing yourself a favor by keeping it relatively simple. Now, I've written all of these slides before we found ourselves in this position, but a lot of this remains true, and I'm just going to give you guys some additional ideas on top of what I have written here that might suit the environment that we find ourselves in today. So keeping your idea simple is still going to be very important, especially now that you might be stuck at home or stuck in whatever environment you find yourself in. So take a look around, consider what sort of things you could document in your environment. Again, I think that there's a lot of potential in the situation that we find ourselves in, just because it's so unique, and so there's so many different responses and reactions that you might be having to this situation. And I think that those are really worthy of being photographed and of being documented in some way. So once you have your concept, visualize what you want at least a couple of your images to look like. Sometimes I like to sketch out a rough idea. So when you're beginning a new project, it can be hard to visualize what this is going to look like, and not that you have to have, each image already in your brain, but if you have one or two images, that's a good starting point. And so sometimes I like to kind of sketch those out, or to take a couple of like rough draft images just to get the ball rolling. So start photographing right away so your idea can evolve over time. This is really important. So start photographing, as soon as you can. Maybe that's today or tomorrow. Either way, it's always best to give yourself as much time as you can to really let your project evolve. So as of now, we have a little less than a month, but what you no longer have to worry about is the developing and the printing of your images, which are obviously very time consuming. So now you can just focus on making the images, which is a unique situation we find ourselves in, but you should use that to your advantage, because you now have all of this time that you would have spent in the darkroom that you now can spend purely on making the images. Okay, so consider what kind of images will look good together and will ultimately communicate your concept well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So creating a series. Your final is 6 to 10 final images that all work together as a series. So there are endless ways to organize images into a final series. Here are some options. So first things first, give yourself enough images so that you have choices. So you'll need 6 to 10 final images. I would suggest giving yourself at least 20 strong photographs to choose from. And this is especially true if you only have one opportunity to take your photograph. So say you're going somewhere or something is coming to you. If you aren't going to be able to revisit that place over and over again, you'll definitely want to take many images. Now, obviously, I need you guys to be smart about how you're taking these images and what you're taking images of. Please do not go take portraits of your grandma. It's just not smart. It's not the time to be doing projects like that. So you're just going to have to push yourselves to be a little bit creative and make the most of what you have available to you. So asking others for their opinions. Once you have all of your images, ask somebody that knows, a thing or two about art or photography, and ask them to help you, pare down these images into 6 to 10 final photographs. Since everything is going to be digital, it'll be really easy to just email somebody the work. And obviously you can, email me, you can email your TA, you can email these images to really anybody that you think is going to give you helpful advice. So in its final form, viewers are going to look at your work like they're reading a book, so from left to right. Now, this is mainly true when we would be looking at these images in real life, but this does still apply to looking at them in an online format. So on Box.com, when you guys upload all of your images into a folder, I'm going to start with the first image and click all the way through to the last one. So organizing your images in a way where that they complement each other, the first one leads into the second one, and so on and so forth, is going to be important. So curating your series is going to depend on your concept. So if your concept is to explore the textures of tree bark, for example, that's very simple, but like I said, simple is great. Keep your series interesting by photographing a wide variety of textures. So don't go out and only photograph, aspen trees, or only photograph whatever type of tree is growing right outside of your house. You'll have to allow your viewer to have options, and so you'll want to go find as many different types of tree bark as you realistically and safely can do at this time, and that way your series is going to have variety throughout. When you begin to narrow down to your 6 to 10 final images, consider alternating similar forms to avoid repetitiveness. So, for example, if you did go out and photograph aspen trees and you photographed 4 aspen trees and you really liked all of those images, what I might do is then stagger those throughout the final series so that it's not 4 images of aspen trees and then 6 images of some other kind of tree. Just alternating those similar forms is going to allow your series to remain interesting from beginning to end. So if your concept is to document a place, so grandparents' house, that one no longer applies. This is just from my my lectures, that are normally not happening during a pandemic. Don't go to your grandparents' house. But you get my idea. Maybe it's your garage, or your dad's workbench, or your favorite hiking trail, doing that smartly so you're not in a big group of people, or some sort of event. Obviously events are canceled at this moment, but maybe it's as simple as you know, your 4 family members sitting down and making a big dinner together, or something like that. Or consider what is different in your life now under these current circumstances that you wouldn't normally be experiencing, and maybe document that. But just considering, if you are going to document a place, think about just showing your viewers a complete representation of the space, taking photos from a distance to introduce the space, and then working your way in and getting closer to examine those little details and precious moments. Okay, so we're actually going to stop here. I'm not going to introduce that last series until next week. So thank you guys. I'm going to link that video that we watched. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is terrible, but I'm going to link that Terrence Simon video in the bottom of the TechSmith Relay description box, and you can watch that if you have faster Wi-Fi. You don't have to wait for it to load. All right, bye guys.